I want to welcome everybody to the May 20th edition of the Daily Cheat Sheet. There's a lot going on in the news. There seems to be a lot going on in the news every day. It's even after you do a show like this and you're done recording, there's 10 more stories that have come out afterwards. It's nearly impossible for anybody to keep up. So we try to keep the stories of the day that we think are the most important. Right off the bat, I want to get into something very quickly. I don't think Trump realized how crazy the world had become in the 4 years that he had since he had left office. His first term, he had an amazing grip on foreign policy because one, defeat ISIS, Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine, there was no Gaza war, and he made a lot of these promises getting in to end these conflicts right away. We see right away today the Ayatollah Khomeini, who took over Iran in 1979, go on, has come out right away and said there is no deal. This is not ending, and we have to trust this mass murderer.
I think I love the idea. We have to trust the Khomeini. The Khomeini, right? Am I thinking of the right guy? Was he the one who was tweeting thanks to all the kids on the college campuses at one point? Great,
Yes.
great guy. Really, real champion for all the keffiyeh wearing morons today. Um, he has basically made clear in a number of different ways, and this time explicitly, that this is a waste of time. Trump, God bless the guy for going and trying to do what he was doing before, but he's made some fundamental errors. And the funny thing is, who does he have to learn from? Himself 4 years or in the previous administration when he was running things and the Abraham Accords. And I'm not the first person to bring this up, but it's important to say the Abraham Accords were all about carrot and stick. They weren't about carrot. And then later, when I asked you for something, well, I gave you a carrot. So can you do me a solid? The idea of carrot and stick was strings attached to everything that you were doing. You want economic an increase in your economy? That means you are going to do what I need to have done. You want my base to remain where it is because it protects your country? You need to do what I need to have done. Today, he's doing something a little different where he is going and making great deals. And the deals they're massive deals. There's no, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you have to admit the deals are massive. Trillions of dollars are happening. Great. The problem is he's dealing with groups of people that are not honest players. They are people who talk out of both sides of their mouths on a regular basis. Many, many years ago, when the PLO, when what today is the Palestinian Authority used to be the PLO, and everyone knew they were terrorists instead of pretending they weren't, and Yasser Arafat was running things, he would give a speech in English. I want peace, I want this, I want prosperity. And then he would turn around and in the same moment give a speech in Arabic that basically said, fuck all that bullshit. It's all about killing the Jews and taking over Israel, right? Over and over and over again. And the same thing is happening today. The only difference is today, because everything is so online and everything else, they're whitewashing everything. They're laundering all of the misinformation through these mouthpieces online and through misinformation in the press and everything else. And we'll get into some examples as we go into this episode. Him
Let's
saying
let's
explicitly, you're wasting your time. And that's a problem.
Well said, Golan. Sorry to cut you off. Mend, it's the same thing going on in Russia. They don't want peace. They're just this is just the reality of the moment. Iran doesn't want to stop enriching. Russia doesn't want to stop invading and taking over land. There's fantasy and there's reality. Reality doesn't like to be ignored. This is the reality of the situation right now. This isn't opinion. This is truth.
I think drawing a parallel between those two is a mistake. Iran is an ideological, genocidal regime that openly calls for the genocide of the people of Israel and all the Jews. So the Russia-Ukraine thing is a little bit more complex, and it doesn't have a religious ideology attached to it. So, separating those two things is probably wise. The approach that Trump is taking in both scenarios, I think, is admirable. You try diplomacy, which is something that the left is always screaming about. Let's go to diplomacy. I mean, they just went way too far, and they thought that kowtowing to the Ayatollahs and trying to free up tons of billions of dollars of money for them was the way to go. And obviously, that was not the way to go. The Middle East was set alight by the Ayatollahs. So the strategy that the administration is taking is let's try diplomacy first, the carrot and stick. That doesn't work. He's going to arm Ukraine to the teeth, and it's going to make it really difficult for the Russians to continue that war, or the Russians could come to the table and strike some sort of peace deal. And he's going to do the same thing with the Iranians. He's going to say, listen, say all sorts of nice things about them, great, fine people, blah, blah, blah. Try to get them to come to the table, try to get them to give it up peacefully. They don't. He says, I tried, and he bombs the shit out of them. So I like that strategy. I think it's worthwhile.
I don't know if that strategy is actually what is going on right now. I don't want to start a rumor. We're really just here to give facts. And it's important to note that when the Abraham Accords were done, it was his last year in office, or his last year and a half in office. He had a very different, uh, he had Mike Pompeo in office. He had real seasoned vets behind him. I don't know right now if he has the same seasoned vets in charge. But listen, you're right.
I think if you say don't go with rumors, don't speculate, then we have to take the facts, and the facts are they're trying diplomacy right now. That's where we're
Right.
at.
And the facts are it's not working right now, and we have to listen to when those people say what they say their intentions. That their
This is an
intent.
important thing is people tell you who they are and you have to listen, right? We know that cliche. I think here we have two situations. One, Trump is saying to the American people, to the press worldwide, and to everybody, I had a conversation with Putin on the phone. We're going to go into an immediate ceasefire. Then Putin comes out and actually undercuts him. It makes him look foolish. It makes him look weak when Putin immediately comes out after he says that and says, yeah, no, sure. I'm not going to do an immediate ceasefire. In fact, we have to deal with root causes. I think that was the phrase used, root causes of the conflict. The root cause of the conflict, since you've just crafted whatever those root causes are, mean that you get to continue as long as you want. So you're not being an honest broker. And the same thing now with this, with the thing you mentioned a moment ago, Judah and Khomeini, saying this isn't going to work because they're not going to say we're going to denuclearize ourselves. They're going to keep dragging their feet until they're probably spinning centrifuges as we speak right now, while Steve Witkoff and everybody else is doing their thing. So yes, they're trying diplomacy, but they may have to expedite the next step.
Okay, let's move on to something we discussed yesterday. There wasn't as much news on it, but what's coming out with Biden and his doctor? This guy's been his family doctor for over 10 years. He was also, of course, a business associate of his brother. And most doctors are saying, man, that this is a form of cancer. The form of cancer that he has is not something that just comes about and progresses within a 6 month span. And obviously, there are rumors swirling around that this is to cover up the cognitive stuff, all this. And I don't want to get into that. The facts are he has cancer. They probably knew he had cancer while he was still in office. And it highlights the machine that is the legacy media, and that is Google, and that is YouTube, and that is Facebook. How they still have such a massive grip. I get we have X, but that's just in a sense all conservatives have.
I actually posted a video yesterday on my social media, which it's about 2 years old, and it was Biden talking about growing up wherever he grew up with, and he slipped and said that he had cancer, and that's how I got cancer, and everybody I know got cancer. So, at the time they said no, he was talking about a mole or some other bullshit, but
The melanoma.
there's, I also heard a whole bunch of experts in that field talk this morning, people that deal with this form of cancer, and they say that it takes many years. Usually, if it's caught early, it's very treatable. The fact that it metastasized and it's in his bones, that takes years. So they knew about it. There was also I forgot which levels, but there's a certain report in your medical that with Biden, they haven't been disclosing what those whatever levels were, but that's a clear indicator that they knew, he would have known, his doctors knew, everybody inside knew. We all knew this Weekend at Bernie's, and it's so funny to see the Democrats and the Democrat talking heads on CNN now admitting that there was a cover-up, but not taking any responsibility in this cover-up.
And I'll take it one step further beyond that, which is, by the way, I will just preface this by saying I really am trying to be kind. right? So what I did was when I first heard about this, I went online and I did a bunch of research. And again, it doesn't make me an expert, but I did a bunch of research on the Gleason score and all sorts of other stuff. That is it possible for prostate cancer like this to appear and within days or weeks just metastasize and go into the bones? And I really wanted to find there's the exception and this high grade, really aggressive. It doesn't exist. And I guess I'm sure there's going to be someone that's going to call me out. Oh no, here's one guy in Nebraska 20 years ago. But generally, it doesn't exist. It's something that does take a long time. So even in trying to be kind, I couldn't find anything to back it up. But what I wanted to mention was it's not just that they're not taking responsibility. What they're saying now, and I've heard now 3 different commentators, and I'm sure there's others I haven't even heard yet, that said, okay, we admit it, the cancer thing, it's such a tragedy. So let's move on from the cognitive abilities conversation, that cover up, because this is what's really important, is that this poor man has cancer. And it's true, poor man has cancer. That's very sad. But what they're trying to do is now take all the culpability of what clearly was a cover and basically brush it aside by distracting us, gaslighting us, by saying, hey, if you say something about the cognitive thing, you're kicking a man with cancer while he's down. So just stop talking about that and let's pretend this doesn't exist. That to me is way more nefarious. That to me is way more evil, that they're basically using this cancer as a method to get out of jail free.
And men, to wrap this up, I think the bigger point also is the New York Post brought this up in an editorial about elder abuse. The odds are, there's an actor, and his name, Golan, from Better Call Saul, who was seeing a doctor for many years for
Bob
seeing a
Odenkirk.
doctor. Yeah. And he was
Yeah.
seeing a doctor for his heart, and he had noticed that he was a Trump supporter, and he's decided to see a liberal doctor because he couldn't see a Trump doctor, a Trump supporting doctor, and the doctor told him to stop taking his statins, and he ended up having a heart attack, man. And this is a very frightening thing when you look at this story, is that one, he had a doctor that probably wasn't telling him the truth, and he wasn't getting the care that he needed, and he had a wife that wasn't giving her husband the care that he needed, that right now is stage 4 aggressive cancer. Who knows? I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm just saying these are things we know to be 100% the truth, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a giant cover up. It is elder abuse. They were dragging this guy around like Weekend at Bernie's. There's now the reports coming out that he couldn't recognize George Clooney, his good friend, when they were introduced. He was one fall away from being placed into a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So they said, his doctor said, this guy falls down one more time, that's it. We're going to put him in a wheelchair. So it was a cover up. And the real question is, who was running the show? Who was running the auto pen? I heard yesterday that came out that Hunter Biden was giving all the pardons to the J6 committee and everyone else. I don't know how valid that is. That might just be completely rumor and made up. But who was? It was definitely not
But
Biden.
someone was, and it wasn't him.
Somebody was.
And here's the problem. You're not going to get the answers that you want on this for probably 40 years, if ever. We'll all be dead by the time most of this stuff is revealed. I want to move on to the next topic, which is the immense pressure Israel is up to, has been fighting as of this moment, from the UK, Sweden, every single one of them forcing Israel's hand. UK pulling back their free trade agreement with them, and it really is when you again look at the 49 conflicts going on around the world, the Israel thing, the fact that this is the most paramount thing to them, really says everything on 2 levels. First, they don't have the support in their own country. And second, that they're willing to throw an ally under the bus, really, to stay in power, is something frightening that we're witnessing with the European Union.
I think it's a general problem that you're seeing across liberal governments, where they think that appeasing a radical population that is anti-Israel, that believes that there's a genocide taking place when the population actually grew, and not countering the narratives. It would take a leader to get up and say that is absolute bullshit. There is no genocide. There's a genocide currently taking place in Darfur, where people are starving to death. In Gaza, people are obese, and there's a lot of food, and the food that was coming in was being hijacked by Hamas and being sold at exorbitant prices in the markets to the population that it was destined for. So there was free food being shipped into Gaza by lots of different governments. Hamas would steal it, then sell it at inflated prices to the population, and that's how they were funding the war effort. So Israel's saying we want to get rid of that pipeline of cash that was going straight to Hamas, that was extending this war. Was a valid reason for them to cut off the aid. And the plan that they have to put forward is going to be much better than what was there. They're going to have the American contractors handing out aid directly to the citizens. The citizens are going to have to present ID. And the United Nations is against that, even though they're saying that there's a verge
against ID. Go figure. Another big establishment.
Well, they're against the whole program because they're saying it might prevent some people from being fearful to go get aid. Which people would be fearful? These are wanted Hamas terrorists. So the United Nations is explicitly coming out and defending those people that would be arrested if they showed up to get aid because they have blood on their hands. That's where we stand.
So they're essentially using it. The United Nations is using the Democrats' voter ID line, why they shouldn't have to show ID to get aid. But Golan, I want to go to you and to point out to his point is that on average, there are 5,500 babies born in Gaza per month. 5,500 since the war started, 5,500 babies. And this was Douglas Murray's point, that the population wasn't growing during the Holocaust, during the genocide, during the concentration camps. And the population is far outgrowing those who have died in Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of things to consider here. Number one, the fact that you literally have Hamas officials, and these are Hamas officials that are in Qatar. Okay, so just to be clear, once again, Qatar harboring Hamas officials, harboring the terrorists as they pretend to be negotiating on behalf of the hostages. Those people have said, and I quote, that all of the people who have died so far in Gaza, all their people who have died in Gaza, are material collateral. Okay, they have been clear about this over and over again. They are using human shields. They're doing it deliberately. They've been doing it deliberately the entire time. And now they've said it out loud. And a lot of people are really upset. Whoa, can you imagine that the people at Hamas believe this? It's like, yeah, we all can believe it because they've been saying it pretty explicitly since the beginning of this conflict. And so that's number one. You have that happening where they are admitting to the fact that that's happening. That same that same Hamas official in Qatar also said, it's fine. It doesn't matter who dies. Our women will have twice as many babies. This is their entire philosophy, right? What we're seeing.
By the
right
way,
now,
I just go on. Hold on a second. I just again, I want everybody to question everything we say. So Golan just made a statement about an official, and we will post that story on our feed so you can see the exact story that Golan is talking about. I want everybody to source and Google every single thing we are talking about, and Google it however you would like. So I think it's incredibly important for us to say that. I don't want anybody to think we're just giving shots in the dark of what we think is going on. That was actually said yesterday or the day before.
right? And it's a really important point. The whole point of this podcast is to not talk about the rumor, to talk about the facts. So here, I will let you know the name of this guy is Sami Abu Zuri. He is one of the Qatar-based Hamas senior officials. And he said, and I quote, the martyrs killed in the war, the wombs of Gaza women will give birth to twice as many. This is the price that must be paid. If we thought in material terms, we would not be able to hold on to our land. Okay, so hey, look it up. There's the quote. Now you know what to look for. And the bottom line is that because we know This is how they think. Because we know this is their strategy, it makes what's happening with the UK and France and Canada even more shameful because they didn't just turn their backs on Israel. They turn their backs on civilization. And why? Because they're counting bodies. They're not counting facts, they're not counting intention, not tactics. They're counting bodies. By the way, half of the numbers of bodies they're counting are also fake, as we know, has been proved over and over and over again. But let's say all those bodies did exist. Who is deliberately stacking those bodies like poker chips? Hamas. They are saying their own words, material calculations. So if that's what's happening, they know they're using dead babies as a PR strategy, which means it's not collateral damage, it's collateral manipulation. And if you are buying into it, then you're just buying into optics. You're just virtue signaling. It's just you kowtowing to terrorist propaganda. And if you don't know that, then you shouldn't be running a fucking country.
Okay, with and great point, well said. Even though you were frozen for about 5 seconds, you're still words of perfection. Man, I want to get to something you wanted to talk about because I think it's extremely important, and it has to do with what I said yesterday with the White House messaging. Um, you could be 100% correct in your points about what you said about Trump negotiating with Iran, Trump negotiating with Russia. Again, we are not getting these messaging points from the White House. What we're getting is we know Theo Von is Trump's favorite podcaster. And on Theo Von's show, he broke out for 2 minutes talking about the genocide that's going on in Israel. And Theo Von, who I don't know, I don't want to assume he went to school or didn't go to school or his background on anything. I don't want to knock him for that. He has the right to have an opinion, man, but he's closely associated with the White House.
Back to what Golan said, it's manipulation. So blowing up kids on your social media feed, obviously you're going to feel terrible, as all of us do. But if you don't do the critical assessment as to figure out how that happened and what caused that and how we got here, then you only got half the story. You're just acting on emotion of an image. So I could show you an image of a little girl who had her arm chopped off and she was left alone in a room where her parents were killed, and she was just bleeding out for hours. And a Muslim Red Cross, not Red Cross, but Magen David Adom, which is the equivalent of the Red Cross, Israeli woman found her and held her and cradled her as this little girl took her last breaths. So, I mean, you could see any of these things and get enraged, but if you don't look at the entire situation critically and say, how did we get here? What caused it? Who's causing this death? How could it end? If Hamas surrendered today and released the hostages, it would be over. That is the answer. And a guy like Theo Von, who is bright, he's articulate, he's got a great following, a lot of young kids, young adults are tuning into his what he has to say. It's irresponsible for him to make a statement like that based on emotion. And there's a recent poll out that showed that in the US, overwhelmingly, the tide has shifted in the younger generations against Israel. The favorability rating of the Israeli government in US population across the board for young adults has shifted, and the tide has turned, and now there's a majority of young adults that are anti-Israel. They have unfavorable feelings about Israel. How does that happen? That happens exactly like this. Guys like Theo Von, who have a giant microphone, get out there, make statements that are not fully vetted, not fully backed up by fact. And then you have a lot of young people that are just going off of emotion, and everything is driven by emotion these days. So that's something that needs to be countered, which leads back to what we said before about leadership, the UK cutting off free trade with Israel over this latest Israeli military offensive in Gaza. That's weak leadership. That causes the next generation to be misguided. If the leadership came out and said, hey, we want this war to end, we call on Hamas to surrender, full surrender, and release all the hostages today. And Israel, we need you to agree that as soon as they do that, this war is over. That would be leadership. We don't have that. We have a bunch of it's weak. It's weak leadership, and it trickles down, and that's where we're at.
Listen, I agree with you 100%. Golan, this is a point I've been bringing up a lot, and is White House messaging. This is we learned from the last election. We have the pod community is extremely supportive of Trump. We've learned that, thank God, Elon Musk and X has somewhat gone the the right road of reporting news that we never would have seen. I believe Elon Musk saved the Constitution. So you could go to influencer pages, Golan, you don't see anything supporting America really, or Israel for that matter. So I want to go to Men's point. That's the messaging they're getting. It's not just anti-Israel, it's anti-America, which is a huge point of Douglas Murray's that these young people are getting from podcasters like Theo or Joe Rogan. They don't realize the good our country has done. They are not being given the lessons of how many lives we have saved, or even what Trump did to ISIS in his first administration. I wonder how many of those people even know what Trump did in regards to shutting down and ending ISIS. Yes, ISIS has been reborn, but what say you as we are closing up shop? Go on.
Well, I think I'm going to dovetail in between these two topics, which is first of all, if you're thinking about how people are listening to the blogosphere, the podcast sphere, the manosphere, all these different spheres that people listen to these days, let's just continue on with Theo Vaughn as the example because he's the most recent one to open his fucking mouth. But he is. There was 4 days ago. There was an article. I think the New Yorker maybe or something like that that said, "Is Theo Vaughn Trump's sidekick?" Like they're really tethering these two together. This is before I think he made these comments, but this is a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is just he's a comedian. He doesn't know much about much. He admits this. This is not me insulting him. He was like emancipated at 14 years old. He didn't really get an education. And so he was one of those guys, similar to what we talked about with Rogan last time, just asking questions, having fun, whatever. But it also means you're susceptible. You're susceptible to propaganda. You're susceptible to bad information. So this is a guy who, to your point about his followers saying they probably blame America too, he just performed in front of the Navy, and the first joke he told was about how the Navy's super gay. And everyone's groaning in the audience and all that. So he's not really on the same page as Trump when it comes to hugging the flag and doing all the rest. He's just doing the things that make sense for clicks, and this is the most important thing to remember. These days, the value that people get is off clicks. Do not forget that TikTok wanted to run a social experiment to see how long it would take to radicalize all the idiot youth into saying that bin Laden was a hero. So they thought, and that this is not my speculation. This is coming from people within both the Chinese government and within the American government, said they suspected it would take X amount of time. I don't remember, weeks, months, whatever it was. Within 48 hours, there were dozens of influencers doing the meme of the day bin Laden was killed and the day I realized he was right. I don't know if you remember, there was a whole thing about that meme happening online. And then reading the manifesto and explaining why it made sense and why this guy's actually a hero. It wasn't because they all suddenly believed what bin Laden was saying. And it certainly wasn't because half of them even understood what bin Laden was saying, because when they tried to repeat it, they were wrong about everything, including the facts of what was actually going on in the world. Why? Because they saw one person who was clearly fed this information by Qatar or by the Chinese communist government who runs TikTok. They repeated it and they saw the numbers go astronomical. And then someone else said, "Oh, that's how you get numbers? That's how you get clicks?" I'll say the same thing. What is it about? I don't know. I'm going to repeat that. And then they saw two people get 1 million views. And so everyone else started to do it too. Today, it's not about truth. It's not about facts. It's not even about feelings. It's about clicks. And so if we are now going to look at this group as our bastion of information, we're in real trouble, because it means that if you've got bot farms that are going to make sure your numbers rise, and that means you make a little extra money, well, then you're going to steer into whatever propaganda you need to. And you often don't care what happens on the other side until, of course, they come for you too.
It's really important that we not defend people with massive platforms want to use the three of us as an example. Mend and I on the phone for about a year and a half were arguing over who was going to win the Republican nomination, Trump or DeSantis. We actually had critical conversations about this for a year and a half. Obviously, I was said Trump was going to win. I'm not negating men's thoughts on why DeSantis and Golan. We've all had critical discussions. It's important to have critical discussions amongst yourselves before. Here's the point, right? Every show usually has a producer. It's your gatekeeper, right? It's extremely important when you're influential, like Tucker or any of these people, to have somebody. The great Johnny Carson, everybody says the greatest entertainer, greatest Tonight Show host of all time, one of the best, always had a gatekeeper for the Tonight Show. If Johnny Carson could have a gatekeeper, Tucker Carlson should have a gatekeeper. Theo Vaughn, Joe Rogan have gatekeepers. We should have gatekeepers. Somebody said people said the show went on too long yesterday. We listen. Those are our gatekeepers. And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to today's edition of the Daily Cheat Sheet. Have a great day, everybody.